I'll ask Michael Kaskey-Blomain from 97.3 ESPN.com here on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. If Jimmy Butler was the man in the room, who's the next guy that should be getting props last night? Ben Simmons' defense, Brett Brown's adjustments, Ennis Monroe off the bench, or maybe do you have a wild card fourth entry in there?
That's a great question, Mike. To me, when I was watching it, James Ennis really kind of jumped off the screen to me, making, big timely plays for the Sixers on both ends of the floor, knocking down threes, drawing charges, converting around the rim. For a team that's, pretty strapped for depth, getting, big productive minutes from a guy like Ennis was huge. So my vote would probably go that way, although Brett's adjustments, were also critical to the victory.
Yeah, I know. We started to show off, there's a lot of people who want Brett Brown out that thinks that he didn't have it in him to make adjustments. And, we fight a lot on this show about the role a coach has in wins and losses. But, last night he made a lot of adjustments. What were some of the adjustments that stood out that propelled this team to be able to win and really steal, Michael, a road playoff game when Embiid was not 100% and did not have one of his better games?
Yeah, that's two straight series, Mike, that we've seen Brett make some, pretty big adjustments after the team looked underwhelming in the opening game of the series. We saw it last series against the Nets where, he did some things offensively with the rotation to, respond after they looked bad at home in game one. And he did the same yesterday. Mainly defensively, the changes he made were huge. Obviously, Ben spending most of the time on Kawhi was the one that's been getting the most attention. But I think switching, trusting Tobias to spend large stretches of time on Marc Gasol and do a pretty good job on Gasol was huge. And then in turn, that freed up Joel to spend a lot of the time that he was in there guarding Pascal Siakam, who was, much less effective than he was in game two. So, Brett basically scrambled the entire defensive rotation from game one. And I think we saw that, it worked really well yesterday.
Question is, can you roll out that same or a similar game plan in game three? Can you say, hey, Ben, 44 minutes, Kawhi Leonard, run around, deter him. Jimmy Butler, be the man on offense. Joel Embiid, 7'2". We need you to run around with 6'9" Pascal Siakam. Can they do something similar to that again?
Similar, yeah, I think they can, Mike. Obviously not, you can't pull out the exact same game plan in a playoff series, their plan for that. But I think that game plan was a lot closer to what the Sixers' potential can be defensively. It relied on guys to handle individual matchups, but also, stick to the team scheme when switches were necessary, when hedging was necessary. I think they did a really good job. Overall just kind of making up for a lot of the, mistakes that they made in game one. Obviously, they'll have to switch up some things, but I think what's working in the Sixers' favor is, Joel was clearly, laboring pretty badly in game two. You have to think that hopefully he'll be a little bit better, at least with the stomach situation. So, he wasn't feeling well. That will probably be, be better. And then Tobias and Jimmy and Ben, those three guys, is really so much of it comes down to them also. And I think they're all capable, of playing major minutes in the playoffs. That's what, the season's geared for. So I think there'll be small tweaks, but overall, I think that you can approach that game, now we'll be in Philly. I think you can approach it with a similar game plan. Yeah, I do.
Michael Kaskey-Blomain, 97.3 ESPN.com. Sixers take game two. I thought one of the underrated parts of the game was Joel Embiid. He's 7'2", asking him athletically, this shows his athletic prowess, to go run around with Siakam, who had shot 80% from the field in game number one. I thought a big difference in the game was Siakam. Siakam was not nearly as effective that he was in game number one.
Yeah, that was a huge difference, Mike. Obviously, Kawhi being not quite as effective, but Siakam was such a difference maker in game one. Now, some of that was he was just on fire in game one. He missed. There were some shots last night that, I was watching it and said that, that's a shot that he looked like he would have made in game one. But, Joel dedicating a large amount of his time to limiting Pascal was huge. And it's a testament to Joel's ability as a defender that he can, keep up with the guy that's obviously, a perimeter player, quicker, more nimble on his feet. I thought Joel did a really good job in limiting Pascal, forces, other guys to step up. And then when you have guys like Jimmy and Tobias locking on to some of these other perimeter guys, making things hard for them, kind of a ripple effect that's all the way down. But, you'll also potentially be getting Mike Scott back into the rotation for Game 3, who's another, capable wing defender that Brett could use in certain situations. So I really don't see any reason why they couldn't have, similar success moving forward defensively now that they have a game plan that at least worked decently for them.
Yeah, let me ask you about Toronto moving forward here. If you were to say, all right, Game 3, after what I saw in 1 and 2, this is what I now expect Toronto to counter with, what would that be?
I don't know that how many changes Toronto will make. We saw their bench got outplayed by the Sixers bench, which is somewhat surprising. But their starters were all, positive in terms of the minutes they played. I think we saw them miss some shots that they would normally make. Danny Green had, multiple opportunities down the stretch. Jody Meeks missed the corner three that was open. So I think there was, opportunities that where if you're Nick Nurse and the Raptors, you're obviously looking at the situation slightly upset that you lost the game. But I don't think it's a situation where they feel like they need to revamp things completely. I think they obviously have to be prepared now for the switches that the Sixers made and look to counteract those. Probably setting up some things offensively where maybe you switch it up, put Kawhi in different spots off the ball, things like that. But overall, I don't think it's a situation where the Raptors would feel like they need to, really revamp a lot of things, maybe just, small tweaks and make some of the shots and opportunities that they weren't able to convert on in Game 2.
Yeah, Michael Kaskey-Blomain here with us. Joel Embiid has not really been a factor in the series at all. He got shut down in Game 1. A lot of that is because of Gasol. In Game 2, we think is because of an illness. They have to get him to be a bigger part of this series. But my question is, if they were able to win the game last night with, I don't know, maybe a 75% or even an 80 to 90%, it wasn't 100% Embiid. Does it make you watch last night and feel pretty good moving forward that, hey, like for me, I had Toronto winning this series in 6. Watching that game last night, if they play defense like that and they can get more from Embiid, the question I have is, can they get more from Embiid? Is this a product of Gasol shutting him down and doing a good job on him? Or was, Game 1, he just didn't have it, he looked a little off, and then last night he was sick? Or do you think that Embiid will become more of a factor offensively? Because he has been a non-factor and you have a split.
Yeah, Mike, and that's what's pretty impressive, like you said, to walk away from Toronto 1-1 when Joel has been, really limited in his production, I think you would consider as a win for the Sixers. And you have to think that moving forward he's going to be, slightly more productive. The issue with Joel is there's so many, it's like a culmination of issues right now. The knee is still lingering. He's slightly out of shape, obviously, because he's not really getting to fully practice and miss a lot of time in between these games to get his conditioning up. And then combined with the fact that he wasn't feeling good yesterday, that was like 3 different things that were really bothering him for the game yesterday. So you have to assume that moving forward, at least some of that hopefully will clear up and he'll play better. But I thought the Sixers kind of had a good game plan for Joel yesterday. Brett did a good job. When you saw Greg Monroe was able to be productive, but Joel, he was still Joel on the defensive end, and he made such an impact defensively that the Sixers have enough talent on the rest of the offensive end that if Joel could concentrate defensively, spend some of that energy there. He doesn't necessarily have to put up the, 26, 28, 30 points that we've come accustomed to him doing. If he can be the force that he is defensively, save some of that energy for shutting down, a guy like Siakam and being a rim protector like he is for the team to stop penetration, and then they look to get, offense elsewhere. JJ still could be better. Offensively, Tobias Harris hasn't been, really heard from much offensively in this series. Overall, he only had 9 points last night. JJ had 11. So, those guys are capable of contributing more. Ben, not to criticize, he's been great defensively, but he has been, limited and shut down pretty well offensively too. So I think there's a lot of room for the Sixers to improve offensively, even if Joel is not, his normal self on that end of the floor.
Can they continue to go on with Ben Simmons not giving them much? He played 44 minutes last night, 6 points. I know his offense is not something that they count on per se, but typically he'll give you 15, 18 points. Can they just, I said on Thursday's show, Michael, that if I'm Brett Brown, I say, Ben, you're going to run around on Kawhi all night, and I don't care what you do on offense. But I don't know if you can do that for all 7 games.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Mike. You definitely need, I think the Sixers obviously they'd like to see double figures, and even the assists could be up. He only had 5 assists last night, but he is, in fairness to him, he's dedicating a lot of that energy defensively, especially in Game 2 to guarding Kawhi. That's kind of a command that he's taken from Brett, that he's taken to heart. He said that he's really embracing that role in this series of kind of being looked at as a defensive stopper. Which is great, but like you said, Mike, they're definitely going to need a little bit more for him, production-wise on the offensive end. I think they got, lucky is not the right word, but the circumstances of the game too last night aren't going to necessarily repeat themselves, with guys, performance like we got from Jimmy or some big shot making from Ennis. So they need more from Ben moving forward, but I think a lot of his, energy is going to be concentrated on the defensive end by design, from Brett and the coaching staff. And as a result of that, you'll probably see, a dip offensively. But with that being said, I'm sure they'd like to see, higher a little bit.
Yeah. Now we see adjustments and changes almost nightly in these NBA playoffs, but can the Sixers move on with Jimmy Butler as their guy? Like, do they say, look, game 1 against the Nets, they lost and he was the guy. We haven't seen that Jimmy Butler. Even last night, he played great and took the big shots. But he didn't shoot great. The shooting percentage was not very good last night. But is Jimmy Butler the kind of go-to guy for a team that makes a deep playoff run, or has he got to be that kind of like late game killer kind of guy? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I know what you mean, and I think, his role with the Sixers has ironed itself out pretty well. It was undefined when he first came, but now they have so much talent that it's not, they don't go into one game necessarily. Obviously, they know where their bread's buttered, with Joel being their top guy and Jimmy and whatnot. But they're able to go in and not have to funnel so much of their offense through one player, that in situations like Jimmy, like you were saying, he can kind of lay low under the radar and pick and choose his spots. And then when the moment comes toward the end of games, like we saw yesterday in that Nets game in Game 1 of the last series, he kind of takes over in that role. And I think the Sixers, just based off the talent that they have, can afford to, kind of have that approach. Obviously, they need Joel to be a little healthier to reach their full potential offensively. But I don't think Jimmy's a guy that necessarily has to be, your go-to guy from opening tip. I think he's a good enough player that he can kind of fit in. And the Sixers have enough talent that they can, survive and advance with, kind of the open approach that if, kind of the hot hand, whoever has it that night, they can go with it. But it's clear that Jimmy's, kind of established himself in that, as did through the regular season. When it's the fourth quarter, he's the one that's going to be relied upon with the ball in his hands to make plays and get them big buckets, night in and night out.
At the real Mike KB on Twitter, I thought Tobias moving to Gasol was a factor, because soon as Boban came in, they pick and popped him, and Gasol hit a 3, and they got Boban. He was a -5 in about 45 seconds. They got him right out of the game. But Harris, was up in Gasol's face. He closed that gap really quick, and I thought that was something that was underrated in the game last night.
Yeah, it definitely is, and that's something that we were talking about, adjustments that the Raptors might make moving forward. That's one thing that they might look to exploit, moving forward in Game 3. If Tobias is going to stick a soul again, they might look to get him more post touches, more sets offensively on the block to try to take advantage of the size difference there. And at that point, the Sixers would have to adjust accordingly. But yeah, moving Tobias there, like I said earlier, it really freed Joel up to not have to guard Gasol and use his athleticism to limit Siakam. So that was kind of a double chain effect that worked well for the Sixers and really was key to them pulling out that victory. But it's something to watch moving forward, because now, as we were saying, the Raptors are aware of that potential and might look to exploit a matchup where Gasol has several inches and a few pounds on Tobias in the post.
Now, it still felt like in the third, like the Toronto was pushing, and then that game was like another 30 to 45 seconds that maybe they would have had enough to win that game. They just couldn't hit the big shot to exploit the advantages that they had later on in that game. They were, 27% from 3, but later in the game, like, they made that push. So Jimmy Lyon was on with us earlier, and he said Toronto missed some shots that they normally make. You look back at this game and you say, look, the Sixers had a great game plan, and they still almost lost the game? Or do you look at it and say the Sixers had a great game plan and Embiid didn't give you much? Which way do you look at it?
I'm usually an optimist, Mike. So I look at it the second way, but also I do see it from the first way. Because I said earlier, like if I'm the Raptors, I'm not panicking because there were shots that were there for them that were open that could have completely changed the outcome of that game with guys that normally make shots. So, from the Raptors' perspective, I'm not panicking. But from the Sixers' perspective, the game plan was great, and they could, it could be improved upon. There was countless times in the first half where they just threw the ball away carelessly, and at the time it didn't seem terrible because they're up, you're up 16, up 18. But I was saying as was happening, like this is what you can't afford to do because it's going to end up being close in the second half. So if they can, take better care, they should have been up, 20, 22, 24 at halftime of that game and had much more of a cushion to withstand that Toronto run in the second half that you knew was going to come. So, I think it kind of goes both ways. But if I'm the Sixers, I feel really good about the game plan and about the fact that if you're just a little bit sharper, cut down the turnovers by 3 a half, and, you get Joel feeling a little bit better and you get Mike Scott potentially back in the rotation, I would feel really good if I'm the Sixers.
Yeah, and, Mike Scott not being there, they went with Ennis, they went with Monroe, and that was essentially it. They essentially last night, Bolden got like 9 minutes, but I'm interested to see if and when Scott returns. Do you think he'll play Thursday night, by the way?
As far as I know, I think it's day to day. He'll be at game time, but if I had to guess, I think yes. From what I've heard, that he should be good to go. That's not official, but that's my guess. I think he'll be good to go.
Okay, because you see him with that boot on, and then somebody was mentioning plantar fasciitis, and that Brogdon's been out for quite a while with that injury. So I was thinking to myself, man, he might be gone for the rest of the playoffs.
Yeah, if that's what it is, he would probably be gone for extended time for sure.
Yeah. So if he comes back, Ennis, Monroe. Do you go with those three guys as as the three guys off the bench? Is that what you plug him right back in there? Or, does he kind of have some thoughts? Because do you keep Ennis and Monroe in these roles?
I don't know how much you can really depend on Greg Monroe to be consistently productive like he was yesterday. I thought that was more of a pleasant surprise and something that Brett kind of had to do, since Joel was limited. I think once Mike, if he is back and available, I think he'll plug right back into that role, which, he did really well in the first round, playing either the 3, 4, or even the 5 in the, in certain situations. They could use him in this series to guard, Pascal, Kawhi, Ibaka. He could, physically guard any of these guys. So I think having him in this series would be, a tool for Brett Brown to really, help them out, especially defensively. So I think that he'll stick with, Ennis and Mike being the two main guys, and then the big guy rotation remains fluid depending on the situation. This series, Monroe, is usable, so I could see him remaining as a backup, definitely ahead of Boban or Amir.
Yeah, it's an interesting spot where, Bolden, I thought, hit a big 3 last night, Mike. There was a spot where I was like, oh, my gosh, and then he throws up a 3, and I was like, oh, my gosh, he just made, like, for him to hit that 3. And there was a spot where the game was kind of, like, totally going Toronto's way there. That 3 was in a pretty interesting spot in the game.
Yeah, it was. It's one of those things where, he almost has a little bit of irrational confidence because he hasn't been playing very well. Throughout the playoffs thus far. So it was definitely, refreshing and good for his confidence-wise to come in and knock down a big shot like that. But I just don't know how much, Brett could really rely on him moving forward. We've seen him get exploited, defensively multiple times through these playoffs. He's still, obviously a super young player with potential, but I think that's one of the reasons we saw, Monroe kind of jump out ahead of him in the rotation. That's a guy that's, a little bit more of, in terms IQ-wise, defensively, veteran, kind of knows how the playoffs will roll, where Bolden's a little bit, more of a roll of the dice. But if he's able to knock down some shots like that consistently, he could definitely earn some minutes moving forward.
Yeah. All right, coming home, the Sixers have been very good here. This is interesting to me because they've been very good. It took them, the first time since 2012 that they beat Toronto. They got one against Boston recently. They got one against the Bucks. So they've beaten all 3 of these teams now that everyone said they could not beat. But at this stage, for me, to win this series, Michael, they got to win both these games, I think. I think they got to win both these games. Otherwise, Toronto wins the series.
Yeah, I probably agree with you, Mikey. I don't think you can necessarily count on going back to Toronto and winning another game. The Sixers are definitely a better home team than they are on the road. So, especially coming off of this momentum, that they just established winning, taking home court back from Toronto, heading back to Philly for 2 straight games. I think that they really should, obviously want to capitalize on that. I'm not saying I don't totally agree that it's over. I think if they split in Philly, go back 2-2, there's a chance that they steal one more in Toronto if they're able to, feel a little bit better, but it's not something that you want to bank on. So, I agree that it's, extremely important that they take care of home court in these next 2.
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, to me, you'll lose one of these games. Now you're asking them to win in Toronto again. And after not winning there for, 7 years? I know a lot of those 7 years was, with less than talented teams, but they have not played very well up there regardless. So I think they got to get the job done here. Let me ask you this. If Brett Brown has to do something different on the come home Thursday night, what's something that he's got to tweak again, even after a win?
I just think the main thing is getting Embiid established offensively and more comfortable. Obviously, like we were saying earlier, he's just been almost a non-factor in this series, which is pretty crazy, all things considered. So I think, if the Sixers want to win this series, they're going to need more for Embiid. They can't expect, 30-point performances from Jimmy Butler every game. So I think establishing Joel, especially in the low post, trying to maybe draw some fouls early on Gasol, get him out and get, a smaller body in there, something like that. But just to get Joel flowing offensively, making him feel, part of the offense, I think will be key for them. That would probably be the main thing for me.
All right. Thursday night, the game right here, 97.3 ESPN. Coverage begins at 8 o'clock. And, of course, the Sixers all tied up 1-1 after a big game from Jimmy Butler and really James Ennis, Greg Monroe. It was a lot of the role players last night, and they get a win 94-89 in Toronto against the Raptors. Michael Kaskey-Blomain here on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. All right, pal. Thanks, man.
Thanks, Michael. See you in Game 3.